My name is Josh Schultz. I'm the Forensic and Valuation Services line leader at Dean Dorton. Today, I'm really happy. I'll be presenting with my partner, Missy D'Arc. Missy, how are we doing?
Good afternoon, right? Maybe morning to some. So yeah, happy to be here. Thank you.
Great, great. For all of you attendees today, no need to worry about your CLE. Just so everyone knows, this will be a full 1 hour of CLE credit. Our marketing team and admin has done a great job, and they'll be emailing you your certificates and any other information you need after this webinar. So I want to thank everyone for joining. This is my first webinar with Dean Dorton, and it's one that me and Missy have talked about quite a bit. Today, we're going to be talking about unlocking the value of personal goodwill in business valuations. Now, and Missy, I guess I'll tell everyone, this presentation is geared for attorneys. And part of the reason that this is geared towards attorneys is Missy and I, through both of our works, even before we came together in a partnership, we had for many years been talking about the evergreen topic of personal goodwill. And in doing so, we're students, if you will. Missy and I in our department, we like to consider ourselves as students of different case law, of different methodologies. And when we started putting this all together and talking to our clients and counsel that we work with, we recognized that there was a hole. And today's presentation is to arm attorneys, those people who, in our opinion, control the discovery process, with information to help them in identifying and assessing personal goodwill. Because one of the lessons we're going to talk about today is before you can value, there's identification and assessment. And as a part of that, we're going to talk about how to identify and gather what is direct and indirect evidence. We're tying in some of our audit methodology to personal goodwill in the family law litigation. We're going to talk about the application based upon this information of specific personal goodwill valuation methods. Some of you on here may be aware of some of those. You have the with or without method, top down, bottom up approach. And we're going to troubleshoot some litigation issues that can impact the scope of work for those appraisers who are on here today. So, as I said, my name is Josh Schultz. I'm the service line leader. The star of the show, though, is my partner, Missy D'Arc. Missy, please, if you could, though, just give everyone a little bit of your background before we move on, if you don't mind.
Sure. Yep. Thank you. So I've been with Dean Dorton now over 15 years, working specifically in the family law area for the most part. And of course, as Josh mentioned, been constantly exposed to personal goodwill issues in our cases that we do. So it's a very important topic in those states where personal goodwill is allowed. Kentucky being one, Florida being another, right, Josh?
Yep.
Indiana. I mean, there's several states where personal goodwill is allowed. So
North Carolina. Yep.
We've had several requests over the years. This is a tough topic, and how can we really get to, trying to understand how much personal goodwill is in an entity. And so what Josh and I have tried to do is bring that together, as Josh mentioned, in sort of an audit context, and with really applying principles of specific attributes to how we can come up with the value of the personal goodwill.
Oh, well said. And for those of you who don't know me, as I said, my name is Josh Schultz. I'm a CPA, an ASA, ABV, CFF, CGMA, CFE. Both Missy and I are testifying experts. We both have testified in various jurisdictions. Missy primarily in the Kentucky and Ohio Valley area, me in the Southeast, predominantly in Florida. So one of the benefits of Dean Dorton is we take all those experiences from these jurisdictions. And that's what allowed Missy and I to start developing this presentation. But let's talk about what is goodwill. And there was a recent case, and I was reading it, and it had this quote in there, and I go, this is how we're going to start it off today. Valuing professional goodwill in a divorce is just as risky as in the real world. It is and always will be speculative in nature. I disagree with that. Mistakes in this regard are routinely made in real life business, and there is no reason why the divorce arena should be any different. Of course, caution be the norm to protect against overzealous experts overvaluing professional goodwill. But if it does exist, a value should be placed on it. Now, why did I bring this quote up? Because it speaks to an attorney, right? Speaking out of their understanding of it. And so when Missy and I were developing this process, I go, we got to look at our clients. What do they think of personal goodwill? And so we both started kind of a, right, Missy, an informal Q&A with the attorneys that we work with in developing this. And we said, hey, talk to us. What is it? And this quote really resonated with us because there's this belief of overzealous experts. And I don't know about the rest of you that are appraisers, but I've worked, and Missy and I have both worked very hard for all those credentials. We just don't put our finger in the air and guess. And so we said, okay, you can't get argumentative. That's not the way to handle these types of things. We're going to go on and we're going to do a little road show, if you will, so we can break down some of those barriers. And to be honest with you, the people that need to be educated on this are the family law professionals that aren't appraisers, in my opinion. They're the ones who do the identification and assessment when they're doing their initial client onboarding and triaging. So just like Missy and I in our practices and our family law group like to work collaboratively with our client and counsel, we also like to learn collaboratively. Okay? Now, coming from our world, the appraisal world, there's some things that we've kept in mind. Please keep in mind that the rules of our profession are not necessarily the same ones set down by the folks in the black robes, right? And you can see that in various jurisdictions in the rulings. If you are in a jurisdiction that lays out the definition of personal goodwill, or more likely other considerations, you should apply their rules, not ours. This comes from Business Valuation Resources Guide to Personal versus Enterprise Goodwill. So whoever you're hiring to do your valuations, hopefully they're reading this, right? Because they need to know the difference, because that's half the battle. So now that we're past all that, we know personal goodwill has many different lenses depending on who is looking at it. Missy, you and I have talked, and there's been a lot of cases recently that have kind of re-energized personal goodwill. Florida, Tennessee has some recently. I think Illinois or Illinois had a recent case. So personal goodwill continues to be the evergreen topic. Part of what Missy and I have recognized is the law is binary. So I'm going to let all of you lawyers know appraisal is not a binary process, okay? There is no black and white. There is a combination of many factors. I sometimes tell people when I'm teaching valuation, it is the world's largest reconciliation, because for those of you who knows, I have to reconcile the risk that I use in a discount rate with a cash flow and a growth rate and all the financials that underline that, okay? And so much like audit, we like to come to a binary decision, which is what the courts and our profession is being asked to do. We need to understand that there is a methodology or a process in place to get us there. And that's where Missy and I developed what we have, just such a great name, by the way. Maybe our marketing folks can help us out on that. The Schultz-Diark Goodwill Spotting Model. And let's step back and let's talk about this. Far too many times, what myself and my partners, in addition to Missy, are seeing in practice is a valuation or a schedule with a valuation. What we have trouble with is what I call a lack of reasonable certainty. When I hear reasonable certainty, I go, trust but verify. I'm not in the trust business. Where's my documentation to support my work papers, right? And so we said to ourselves, there needs to be a staged process, right? So that when it becomes time to do a valuation, you have done the upfront legwork to determine, is personal goodwill and or enterprise goodwill even an issue in this case, right? Is there personal goodwill? Is there pure personal goodwill? Is there non-transferable personal goodwill? Is there enterprise goodwill? Is it transferable, non-transferable, marketable? All of those types of things. So that's where identification and evaluation come into play first and foremost. Missy, did you want to say anything specifically about that?
Well, and again, you talked earlier about the intake and when the client comes in. I mean, what we'll say to you is, the sooner we can get our hands around this issue, the better. So, involving us at the early stages is super important for us to do a comprehensive review of personal goodwill and to start working through these stages.
No, I agree. And I think, a lot of what we're trying to also educate everyone on is sometimes people think there is a goodwill issue. Well, let me explain what goodwill is. So, being a former internal auditor, I love process flow charts. This is my attempt in using, we don't have a Microsoft Visio to use, but here is the process. Step number one is personal goodwill and asset. Now let's talk about that question. What determines an asset? Well, there's accounting rules, but then there's also the legal rules. And then when I talk about legal rules, there's kind of phases to that. There's just the general legal rules that us as accountants who are putting together financial statements need to be aware of, right? Rights and obligations. There is also then the legal rules related to a divorce litigation, okay? So we have to ask ourselves, is personal goodwill an asset? Okay, and think about that term asset. Asset means I own it, right? I have that right and obligation. I get the benefit, the economic benefit of that, right? And this is above my pay grade. There's contracts and all types of legal instruments that are mitigating factors that can change the type of goodwill. It can move the ownership of goodwill. So we're going to go through all those. So when we ask ourselves this question, and you should have a handout today. If not, we'll get that out to everyone. We ask everyone to perform a factor assessment. This factor assessment is something that, with the help of Missy, I've been screaming about for about 2 years now, okay? That factor assessment, right, is going to, you as an attorney who's sitting down with either the informed or the uninformed spouse, we built this as part of your intake process. So when someone says to you, I have a business that's got to be valued, start asking these questions. I mean, to Missy's point, if we can get into some of these questions earlier, we can determine the extent of our work. We all know that, look, hiring an expert, especially in a personal dispute and the fees that go along with it, we're fully aware of that, right? We're looking to drive value in this dispute resolution process. The next thing is, and we'll get into the factor assessment, that's really the key today. We determine, is personal goodwill transferable? Or is it pure personal? And if it's transferable, what are the contractual arrangements from that? No, that means you have pure personal. Stop. If yes, we move on. the next thing we have to ask ourselves is personal goodwill a marketable asset, right? If not, stop. If yes, is there other identifiable intangible methods? So, real quickly, what is transferability in goodwill? I'm sorry, was there a question? No? Okay. Transferability, the basic premise of transferability is it is a separatable, it's something in fair value you see a lot and generally accepted for fair value reporting when they do purchase price allocations and they break out the tangible assets, the desks and chairs, and then they assign some value to contracts. They assign some value to goodwill, right? There's some rules in there about an intangible asset. And personal goodwill is an intangible asset. Number one, is it separatable? Can I take that workforce and separate it, right, from the business or the combination of assets? That's one thing we have to ask ourselves as an appraiser. Secondarily, do I have contractual, or not do I, who has contractual ownership? Is there contractual ownership, right? And when we're doing that, what are we trying to understand there? Is there enterprise goodwill? Because enterprise goodwill, if we can get into intangible assets up from that, we can reconcile to that. Is it personal goodwill? Okay. Well, is it non-transferable personal goodwill, i.e., pure personal goodwill? And that's another component, especially with some of the case law. So the focus of valuing goodwill under the rules of family law is generally on transferable enterprise and personal goodwill. That changes in certain jurisdictions. Just a concept to keep in mind. It could easily, well, while not essential to finding a functional definition of personal and enterprise goodwill, without a clear understanding of the issue of transferability, we don't understand what an intangible asset is. And I think sometimes we need to, I'm a big believer on, let's go back to the textbooks. What is an intangible asset? How does that definition then equate to the court's definition of personal goodwill and all the components into it? Another thing that needs to be understood about transferability is this concept of willing seller. This is a hypothetical exchange. Please understand that evaluation undertakes several assumptions. Your job as an attorney is to determine whether our assumptions are reasonable, right, and verifiable, okay? But is this a willing seller valuation, or are we looking at some other premise of value, okay? Missy, any thoughts about that as far as transferability and what you've kind of seen? And it's a new concept. It's not a new concept, but it's a concept that we feel that we really want the attorneys to understand a little bit more, right?
Yeah, and it's not, again, it's also about, it might be transferable, but how long does it take to transfer?
Yeah.
I mean, is it transferable tomorrow or in a year when you've been able to transition? I mean, in our world, in the accounting world, in the legal world, right? You're transitioning clients to the next generation, and it can't be done tomorrow. It's got to be done with trust and over time. And so that's part of that transferability question.
Yeah. And then to your point, though, when you are transferring clients, going back to what I was asking, what are we transferring, right? Is it pure personal goodwill, right? I mean, what's the definition of personal goodwill? The value of the business derived by the personal reputation, skill set, or is it just a form and function of transfer, to your point? And as you know, Missy, I did an article, but then also a presentation recently with Jim Allardine talking about value to holder versus value in exchange, and how in divorce, some of the valuation approaches that are used in that hypothetical valuation, right, in that without what they're showing is value to the holder, not value in exchange. Well, so Missy, that's all the come up of it, but here's the good stuff. I'll let you start talking to everyone and teach them the good things.
So, as we mentioned earlier, I mean, we really want to look at process, and we want to look at, you know, methodologies and what can help us try to determine this bucket of enterprise versus personal. And so we have characteristics that we've identified, you know, through our work with others and in our industry, and through our experience. And you'll see
And
those
all of these characteristics, sorry, Missy, but
yeah,
all of these characteristics come out of that BVR personal versus enterprise Goodwill compendium. So this is a product of Rod Burkert, Jay Hishman, Jim Allardine. We've been lucky enough that they've all looked at this and, you know, nodded their heads at it, if you will. But I do want to bring this up. This isn't us just coming out of these are our own. We're able to support those types of things.
exactly. Um, and you can bet at every ASCPA litigation conference we go to, there is always a class about personal goodwill, and we continue to work with each other and try to refine these things, as Josh mentioned. And we're very fortunate to have relationships with those, like Jim Allardine, who have done this work for a very long time, and they're more than willing to try to pass on that knowledge, and it's really great for us. So again, the characteristics, we've got 10 characteristics listed on the left side there, and then trying to determine, okay, well, so for instance, let's look at customer loyalty. Enterprise-based customer loyalty means enterprise would be company specific, right? So what about the company presents this characteristic? So as it says here, things such as pricing, value, the reputation of the company versus of the person. Location. Is there one location or are there 10 locations? Where is that location? If I am a pharmacy and I'm right next to the hospital, that's a very positive enterprise issue for location.
Correct.
Convenience, a unique product or service. Again, that's company related, not to the individual. But when we're looking, then flip that on the personal side, then here's the customer loyalty. Here's where those personal relationships come in with owners or key employees. And are there contracts with key customers or not? If you have contractual relationships, that can be more of an enterprise piece where you're bound, the company is bound by a certain period of time to those terms. But if they're not, if that contract's not in place, then it's much tougher to say that those customers would have to stay if something would happen, right?
Yeah, and one thing on that, Missy, to your point, like if you look just at customer loyalty, right? First thing I want to mention to everyone is you're probably going, well, my appraiser sends me a list and they want tax returns, general ledgers, and an operating agreement. I would tell every attorney on here to go read Revenue Ruling 59-60. Most courts recognize that because that is the fair market value standard. Although I know appraisers on here will say, Josh, you're not right code. I'm not getting into it. But in Rev Ruling 59-60, it gives out the steps that an appraiser should look at. As an ASA, I refer to USPAP, they're in there. One of those is understanding the characteristics of the business, right? If you look at these characteristics that Missy and myself have identified, you can't get those off of just financial statements. So we're letting the attorneys know that these are information sources. You can do our site visit. You can do some cubicle auditing for us by asking about the business. The second thing I want to bring up is if you look at customer loyalty, right? The difference between enterprise and personal, because customer loyalty, Missy, it's probably one of those gray areas. There's a lot of, well, this side says this and then this side says that, right? Well, you're judging customer loyalty in the context of personal versus enterprise. Well, look at this. Customers may have many other options for similar goods and services, but what's driving them to that service or goods provider, right? And then you reconcile, well, is it location? Is it pricing, right? And so you can't, again, folks, you can't look at these binary. You got to look at it in conjunction with the characteristic you're looking at. Sorry, Missy, go ahead.
No, great stuff. Exactly. And to Josh's point, I mean, we're trying to build the evidence, right? We're in both enterprise and personal. We're trying to build the evidence so that we can make a credible assessment.
We're doing an investigation into personal goodwill. And, I mean, yes, Missy and I are both fraud fighters and CFEs, so we are schooled and investigative, but we're also auditors. And we recognize that in doing our personal goodwill investigation, we're trying to identify tangible documents or information that can validate these characteristics.
Exactly.
Missy, let me ask you about these characteristics. So employment agreements. Why the importance between enterprise versus personal and employment agreements?
Again, I mean, much like a contract you might have with a customer, if you have a contract with that employee, then the company has that contract and the employee is bound to that contract with the company.
Unless it's pure personal and it can't be transferred. But to your
Correct.
point, the evidence of the transfer is in the contract, if I'm hearing it correctly, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Next one here, let's talk location. I'm going to ask you about a dentist office. Single dentist office, right? There's a lot of cases out of Tennessee. Our friend Mr. Vance down there, if he's listening, me and him have talked about it. How can location, I mean, right? Like for a CPA, does location matter?
Well, certainly, I always joke that I want to put my office downtown in the parking garage by the courthouse, because whenever I see attorneys, they're like, oh, hey, I need to call you. And so, yeah, I do think it makes, certainly location, it makes a huge difference. But why does the location make the difference, right? Why?
Yes, I agree with you. Management structure, to me, when I hear management structure, I start thinking about transferring out some, I think a lot of things. I think number one, you're putting in mitigating controls to remove risk with a management structure. What kind of risk? Is part of that risk reputation risk, financial risk? Could it be the risk of ensuring that the business can go on?
Exactly.
You start to see management structure, that's where the transfer or the institutionalization, especially of professional service providers, that's evidence of that. They're handing over responsibilities. But that in mind, right?
Correct.
How then is that involved? And I also think management structure speaks to business size. This is something that has come up. I mean, last year at this time, I was Josh Schultz of Schultz CPA. This year, I'm Josh Schultz of Dean Dorton. Well, we got 600 employees at Dean Dorton. Josh's value in the Schultz CPA structure, very different than Josh's value in the Dean Dorton structure. So management structure, size, right? What about marketing and profit allocation?
Josh, I was to say, to your point real quick on that, we see this all the time. When folks are getting a divorce, we have a small business, and guess what? There's no succession plan. There's nobody. if that person gets hit by a bus tomorrow, that's always my famous question, right? What happens if you get hit by a bus tomorrow? What happens to the business? What happens to the revenues? What happens to the cash flow if you are not here? Can it continue? Will it continue, maybe dip for a little bit and then continue on? Or does it tank? And that helps us really trying to understand the dependence that that business has on that person.
And that's why looking at the structure and the characteristics of the business are equally important, because anyone who truly understands business and business design, most businesses, at least the ones that I have seen, and I go back to my days of Royal Caribbean, you're managing risk, right? You're managing various types of financial, operational, compliance, and strategic risks, right? And Missy brought up a good point here. The biggest risk in the with or without method is the loss of the grand poobah, whoever he or she may be. And
Correct.
so if there are processes and or controls, i.e. a management structure, maybe something from a marketing standpoint, how does that go into your personal goodwill? Because then again, remember, you're going to get a valuation, and that valuation is going to be an assumption of what this business looks like. So guess what, you attorney, if you're on a cross-examination and they go, oh, 95% of it all goes across the street, but you have a management structure. What's the purpose of the management team? And then they go, oh, well, they're all going to. So is this value in exchange, or is this value to the holder in some sort of a hypothetical scenario that is not based upon any real thing other than a black swan event? I'll continue. How about marketing and profit allocation?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we look at the marketing and if the public knows the company as you know the business valuation firm of Florida versus Schiltz CPA, what does the public know the company as?
Yeah.
And again, does that relate back to the owner? Is the owner's name in the business?
Yeah.
What's that brand recognition? Is it the company or is it the individual?
So everyone can read these. We don't have to go through them. Let's talk about our audit methodology. So I won't give a speech on AAU 101 like I took in university, but when you audit, and I can say this from experience, and there's a lot of Excels and work paper binders that I've gone through in my career, there are certain audit tests or procedures, right, that you perform. Well, they kind of fall, and before, I can say this because before I became an expert witness, I was an internal audit lead. I was a director and a manager in some big companies. So I have a career in audit. When you do an audit test, when you test for personal goodwill, the marketing characteristic, there's 7 ways to perform a test as an auditor or as an accountant, right? You can do an inspection. You can observe. Yep, I actually had at one point in my career had to go down to I remember I was some company up in Nova Scotia. We had to walk on the outside in February and make sure all the locks for all the inventory buildings were up there. And we had to write it down. That was my observation.
My observation, I got a funny one. I will
Please.
never forget my observation at Ernst & Young. I had to walk up a vat and look down for pickles. Yes, pickles in a vat to see if they were really the pickles were in there and being then sold in our jars. They called them fresh pack. There's a reason it's called fresh pack. But anyway.
We're not in the trust business. Another thing that we can do is we can do confirmation. I remember my first time having to do a cash test. I actually had to email the bank person to make sure that that was the balance. We can do a recalculation, reperform a control. You know, okay, you say you actually review you review the financial statements. I see your signature on the page. Let me go and re-perform that to see if I came to the same conclusion. We can do analytical procedures. And finally, we can do inquiry. Now, in divorce litigation, right now, you get your financial statements so you can do some analytical procedures. Sometimes you'll see inspection and observation in the form of a site visit, although a lot of those site visits I don't think have anything more than just trying to get a general business description out of them. And then last and not least, you got inquiry. Well, attorneys have the power of inquiry over all of us through interrogatories, through depositions, and a lot of this that we can do, we being appraisers, we can get as much financial information. But again, it's not binary. There's going to be a gray ocean out there. We need to piece all this information together. So let's do some case studies and try and put this thing to light. Missy, go ahead.
Yeah, so yes, absolutely. Our first case study, which centers around some interesting cases of late. But we talk about a practice that has 10 doctors in this particular OBGYN practice. They're operating as a partnership. It was started by 3 of the 10 doctors who are actually still practicing, and they've been in business for over 30 years. New doctors join the practice when they come in, they're employees, and they have the option of buying in after 2 years. The partnership agreement prohibits partners from soliciting patients or employees upon termination, okay, whether the termination is voluntary or involuntary. The practice is located on hospital property.
And if everyone listening, right? Sorry, Missy. I hope everyone is listening. Missy kind of hid some of those characteristics into these bullet points.
Exactly. So what are some of the things in our characteristics we just saw that ring true with the verbiage there? Keep going.
Well, the one thing I'm picking up, obviously, is location.
Yep.
The other thing that I'm picking up on is this partnership agreement, right?
Yes.
I have some more questions on people joining the practice, more questions on management, though, at face value. Okay. But keep telling me more.
All right, so let's talk about, that was a company background. Let's talk about marital litigants background. So we have Dr. Whitecoat and husband were married in 1993. Dr. Whitecoat graduated medical school in 95. So she is an OBGYN partner. She joined the practice in 2003 as an employee, and she became a partner 2 years later in 2005. Each partner is paid based on their collections and allocation of overhead expenses. Dr. Whitecoat is specifically known for her work in gynecological robotic surgery and speaks on the subject nationally. Okay, so what are some of the buzzwords we're seeing here? Certainly we've got reputation.
Yeah, I mean, you know, especially in working with like Mark Dietrich and everything, you know, you want to look at these practices like a CPA, right? I mean, yeah. You can't assume that I can do a taxes. That's not what it is, right? And so for me, like the one thing I'm reading here is I hear about Dr. Whitecoat, and it sounds like she's created almost some personal brand for her. What does that look like then in economic benefit? Because at the end of the day, valuation, assets provide economic benefit. Assets provide revenues or cost savings. And if it's truly personal, right, how does that economic benefit of asset number one compared to assets A, B, C, D, X, Y, Z?
Correct. And when we're doing medical practices, dental practices, professional firms, you know, one of our asks is going to be of partner A through D plus the employed physicians, what are their revenue? What cash flows are they bringing in? How do they stack up,
Sources.
if you
Yeah.
will, with the rest of the group, and in what area? I mean, in this
That's a good
particular
point,
case,
Missy, as opposed to them working as a consolidated group of assets.
correct. I mean, they may spend part of their time seeing patients every day for visits, but what piece is her surgery and of this thing that she's well known for? So it's
Yeah,
not only about asking total production, it's asking what type of production are they doing and how does that stack up with the rest of the group?
great. So, knowing those basic factors, how would you audit customer loyalty, employment agreements, and location?
So again, I probably jumped the gun on that, but I mean, certainly we want to know how the numbers pair up to everyone else in the practice, right?
Uh
How
huh.
does this person's cash flow, cash being brought in, compare to the other partners? And if
Why
they're
is it
all,
different?
and why exactly why? Um, certainly there's non-competes in this particular situation. So if a doctor leaves, they can't take their nurse practitioner with them. Okay, they can't take the patient with them. All right, so that's more on the enterprise side. Location. I mean, to have a practice right next to the hospital, uh, that's very compelling for an enterprise attribute.
I also think location for these types of practices in more rural or smaller areas where there's less competition is something that needs to be considered. I'm going to skip through our related questions.
Yeah.
I want to get to our next case study, the manufacturer and the distributor, with and without heavy assets. So, yeah, there's also been some recent cases, right, where I've seen personal goodwill in huge manufacturing companies. And when I say huge, I'm talking 15 million in fixed assets, and that's not real estate or property. We're talking heavy equipment. Back to, at the end of the day, folks, you got to ask yourself, what am I buying? Am I buying a product or a service? Why am I buying it? I think that's another question, right? Am I buying it because I'm in a divorce and I need Josh Schultz or Missy DeArc? Okay. Why am I taking Josh and or Missy over person X or Y? Is that personal goodwill related? Is it because of price? Like there's those components as well too. Okay. I mean, personal goodwill and pure personal, you have a machine that separates itself. But speaking about machines, let's get into our case facts here.
Okay, so we've got Derby Automotive. They're an S corporation, owned 51% by Mrs. Joan Bauer and 49% by husband, Mr. Joe Bauer. Started in 2021 as a result of a minority-owned business contract with Ford Motor Company to produce batteries, basically the electric batteries for hybrid cars. While the company has other customers, Ford represents 75% of their revenues.
So, just going through this, huge customer concentration risk. So,
Yep.
from a valuation perspective, I'm looking at the risk, right, of that.
Correct.
I also picked up that the company started because of a minority owned business contract.
Correct.
So, going to have to find out some more about that contract, is what I'm hearing.
Absolutely.
But let's hear about, oh, there's more. Go ahead.
Company has 250 employees. Um, Here's some management structure information. There's 4 vice presidents who report directly to Mr. Bauer. We have a VP sales, VP ops, VP manufacturing, and a VP of finance. Derby Automotive has a board of directors, 7 people. Mr. and Mrs. Bowen are both on the board, as well as 5 professionals not employed by the company. All right, let's talk about their background. The Bowers were married in 1990. Mr. Bauer is the president and chief executive officer of Derby Automotive. He worked for Ford for 18 years before starting Derby Automotive. Miss Bowers never really worked in the business, but she does attend the quarterly board meetings.
Okay. What do our characteristics tell us?
Yeah, so again, we've got some management structure here, right? We've got certainly it hopefully sounds like if something happened to Mr. Bauer, we've got a team of people. And again, these are assumptions, but we would.
But those are assumptions that we're identifying at face value by going through the characteristics. It's somebody giving us a very general description of the business.
Correct. I mean, the reputation, certainly Mr. Bauer working at Ford, I'm sure had a nice hand in helping get that contract. However, he's not a female, so the minority piece has to do with Mrs. Bauer being in the 51% owner.
Yeah, and so that's tough, right? Because I think you're dealing with two things in your work that you have to contend with. At face value, I could see somebody saying, well, they don't get the 75% of revenue without Mrs. Bowers, right? Yes.
Yeah.
But let's ask ourselves this question. Is Mrs. Bowers even in a position to get that contract without Mr. Bowers?
Exactly.
Hence why you can't have binary decisions, right? And that's why every valuation in business goodwill, these characteristics, I've been doing this for close to a quarter of a century. I've never seen a business, large, small, foreign, domestic, where everything lined up the same, Missy. Have you?
Nope, never.
Yeah, I'm kind of, I'm saying that in jest, but my point is, just like Rev Ruling 59-60 tells us to understand the business and its operating characteristics, the reason for that, right, is to understand how those numbers end up there. Those numbers are just the end to a decision making. How the sausage gets made is ultimately the question where attorneys can help us in discovery, right? Exactly. I think asking these questions, number one, should help you frame your litigation strategy, right? Should help you determine what, if any, expert you may need on this subject or in others. And it can also very easily limit issues by going through this, right? I think that there's a lot of people that just make assumptions about personal goodwill because of a type of a business or a product that a business sells. But a hair salon in Jacksonville is not the same as a hair salon in New York City. And I've said that before. All right, we got one other case study. The Key Plumber. And this comes off of, for any of you who have listening, I'd be curious, how many of you have seen key person discounts or heard of that? That's what this case study talks to.
Right. So we have subject company background here. We've got the Key Plumbing LLC. It was started by Mr. Jacob Key in 2014. He worked as an employee in a competing plumbing business, Marker Plumbing, and left actually to start his own company. Interestingly, there was no non-compete signed between Mr. Key and Marker Plumbing during his employment. He's the 100% owner of Key Plumbing. He employs about 12 licensed plumbers and 3 apprentice plumbers. However, he learned he's not going to lose these plumbers, and he got a 1-year non-compete from his licensed plumber. The apprentices are not required to sign. So our marital litigants background, Jacob and Mary Key were married in 2010. He spends his time in the business building relationships with contractors as well as negotiating with vendors on materials and terms. Actually, Miss Mary Key has also worked in the business. She actually was working as the bookkeeper since the company started in 2014. However, she does have an accounting degree and she is paid a fair market value salary.
So the next slide, I'm going to give credit to Mr. Jim Allardine on. and he's allowed us to use this slide. Value to the holder versus value in exchange. And I think the case study that Missy just presented talks a little bit about where one lens could look at it differently, right? And this, right, to compete or not to compete, if it's transferable, right, that means there's less enterprise goodwill. Where if it's non-transferable, we're going more to personal goodwill. So, having said all that, and going back to our case study, how does this key plumber situation work out, Missy, when you put it through the factors?
Yeah, I mean, again, we talked about how he has the relationships with with the customers being contractors as well as suppliers. Um, it is a smaller business. He has the 12 plumbers, and those plumbers do have non-competes, so that's good. That's more on the enterprise side. But no question, he's a key individual. And again, do any of those licensed plumbers, are they performing really in the management role to where they could help continue to run this company if something happened to Mr. Key?
No, that's great. And right on time.
Look at that.
If anyone has any questions, please feel free to submit them right now. The good news is we've gone over the 51-minute mark, so you're going to get your CLE credit. Look, this is an ongoing topic. Missy and I will be speaking about this next week at the Greenbrier for the ABA's Family Law section. If any of you have questions, comments, please reach out to myself and or Missy. We'd be happy to let anyone know. Missy, any parting thoughts you want to leave our guest with as they're going through their personal goodwill conundrum?
Yeah, I mean, again, hopefully what we're really trying to do, as Josh pointed out, is we're trying to help you as you formulate your trials or your case strategy and your discovery request, which again, we're also happy to help you on a case-by-case basis with that. Just get us involved early, and we can help from the beginning, try to formulate what this looks like. Unfortunately, we get a lot of calls sometimes that say, hey, mediation's next week, can you help? And that's not the utopia of what we would like to do when we're trying to offer value and in these harder subjects.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully everyone picked up on this, that to do a personal goodwill, I don't know how you don't address those characteristics in your process, right? Step number 1 is identify. Step number 2 is assess. You can't do step number 3, which is evaluation, until you do some identification and assessment, right? What, if any, other intangibles may exist besides personal goodwill? And one of the things that I'd be happy to hand out, we received it from NACFA, it's a list of intangible assets. There's over 140 of them right now. I got 2 books up here on my shelf. So there's more than just workforce and a covenant not to compete. There's several different technological, marketing related, contractual related intangible assets. With that said, appreciate everyone turning in today. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Missy and myself.
Hey, Josh, it looks like we did get one question come through.
Okay, what is it? I'm sorry.
Hold on, I was trying to pull it up here. I don't know, Sarah, we may need your help.
I can, yes, of course, I can jump in. Can you share a chart of the characteristics with the group? Can we email that out?
Yes, actually, we're going to email out. We have a very clean version of our presentation that we're going to go ahead and we'll send that that actual characteristic. I mean, our marketing team always does a great job. So yeah, we'll be happy to send that out to everyone.
I think we also had another question regarding language samples for operating agreements to apply a buyout upon a separation, including by death.
That one, I'm going to ask that person to reach out to us separately. I need to understand a little bit more to see how I could help or who we could point you to. It sounds like you have a pretty unique situation there. We'd be happy to hop on a call or shoot me or Missy an email and answer that one.
Okay, great.
Well,
We're
thank
going
you,
to
everyone.
Yep.
Have a great one.
Have a great day.